afternoon and welcome to the library. Have you ever started researching for a project, read a whole bunch of great ideas at the start, and then when you go to write your essay, find you're spending half your time going back to figure out which book these ideas came from? Or perhaps you've been assigned an annotated bibliography and you don't know where to start. That's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about what an annotated bibliography is, how to write one, why it's important, and how this process can help you in other assignments that you're working on. As a history graduate myself, I'm familiar with writing annotated bibliographies, and I've also spoken with your professors, so I know that what I tell you today will fulfill the requirements of your course. By the end of the session, you'll have a better understanding of what an annotated bibliography is, and you'll have a framework of 4 points to follow as you write annotations. I've also given you a handout that goes through all of these points, and it also has a detailed example that I'll go through on the screen, but there's a lot of text there, so it might be easier to follow along on the paper. There will be lots of time for questions at the end, but if anything I'm saying doesn't make sense, please stop me as we go along. The purpose is for you to learn how to do an annotated bibliography, and if I'm not making sense, I need to know that, so please feel free to interrupt. Alright, so let's start off with what is an annotated bibliography. You've all written bibliographies for the papers you've submitted so far, so we'll start with that. What's that? List of sources you've used in your paper. Exactly. Alright, what's an annotation? Any ideas? Notes. Exactly, yep. Notes usually about the content or style of the source. So an annotated bibliography then is a list of sources used along with notes about the information, about the sources, notes about the content and style. So what is included in these notes? Well, we've got 4 things. We've got content, credibility, context, and rationale. A complete annotation then gives an overview of what the source is about. It shows who the author is and what qualifications they have to be writing anything on the topic. It establishes how the source fits with the other stuff you've been reading, and it also shows how you are going to use that source in your writing. Alright, so this all sounds like a lot of work. Why bother? Why not just get to work and write the paper and be done with it? I've got a few ideas up here, because profs like to give you more work, to show you didn't plagiarize, always a good thing. To provide summaries for people who are too lazy to read the book, or, my favorite, because writing annotations forces you to think critically about the sources you're using and helps you to structure your essay early on. So writing these annotations does make you look at all of the sources you have and how they fit together. This should help you at an early stage to recognize where you need to do more research on your topic. And it also shows you what sources you can cut out. So what do we include? Content. Now this is going to be brief. We're talking 2, 3, 4 sentences, usually not many more than that. You're not trying to summarize the entire book or article, whatever. You're trying to highlight the author's thesis, their main point, their main arguments, and you also might want to talk a little bit about how these arguments are supported. So what types of evidence used? If you're looking at a book about the Japanese experience during World War, the author might use evidence from interviews with people who were in internment camps, that type of thing. So the evidence used could be, it doesn't have to be firsthand, it could be a historical look at certain documents, that kind of thing. But you do want to make note of what type of evidence is used. Here is part of an annotation that I created for Colin Calloway's New Worlds for All, one of the main history texts from the American history course. And I've highlighted the general topic of the book, that it's about European and Native relations, and I've talked about the author's thesis, that each group influenced one another. And I've also mentioned that he uses a lot of primary material. And he also uses a lot of footnotes and has a big bibliography showing it's written at an academic level appropriate for a university level paper. So next we need to talk about who wrote the source, why they wrote it, and what qualifications motivations the author had. We need to consider why they wrote this piece because the author's motivation might impact what was included in the work or what wasn't included. For example, if we were looking at an article on racial equality, and we had one written from a member of the KKK, one written from a Martin Luther King supporter, they're both on the same topic, but both viewpoints will be very different, and the information contained in each will probably be very different as well. So you want to be aware of the author's bias through this way. You also might want to mention how current the information is, or whether it's a primary source. So you don't always have to use the newest source. You don't always have to use something that was published yesterday. But you do want to be careful with something published maybe 30, 40 years ago. Perhaps there was another author that came along and disproved this author's thesis. So that's what you want to mention here. Cartoon we have there says, on the internet, nobody knows you're a dog. Now by now you've all recognized the dangers of using unsupported internet material. But even when you're looking at a journal or a book, just the name doesn't tell you a whole lot about the author. So in an annotation, you might want to include a bit of author background. You can usually in a book find an about the author, a little blurb on the back or inside the cover. Or you could try looking them up online, or using a directory like a Who's Who book, or perhaps a Canadian Dictionary of Biography, depending if it's a Canadian author. Now you don't need to do a lot of research on the author, but you do want to say a bit about them. So in the example, I've mentioned that Calloway is a professor of history and Native American studies, and I found that by looking on the inside cover of the book. I've also talked about his approach to the topic, that he's careful to balance the two viewpoints. I also noted, however, that he has published a couple books on this topic since New Worlds for All came out, which indicates that this might not be the best source for me to use in this paper. So we've talked about what the book's about, who wrote it, and why. We're halfway there. Now we need to talk about how this source fits with the other stuff we're reading. As you might notice this little warning box here, this can be very difficult when it's a new topic you're researching for the first time and you don't really know what else is out there to compare it to. You might need to go back and add these notes to your annotations after you've read a couple sources. You can't very well say, this book promotes a new viewpoint that I've never read before when it's the only book you've ever read on the topic. So for this section, you want to talk about how this source might fill a gap in your research. Maybe you're researching military issues and you have one source that brings in women's issues viewpoints. So that's something that you would mention here. Here I've talked about how Calloway's book was unique among the other sources I looked at because he focused on the native viewpoint as well as the European, which most others didn't. Finally, and most importantly for your final paper, you need to explain how the sources are relevant and why you're going to use it in your own writing. How does the source contribute to your own understanding of the topic? Does it provide you with general background information, a biographical sketch of one of the key figures, that type of thing? And specifically, how does it apply to the argument that you want to make in your paper? Does it support your thesis, one of your sub-arguments, that type of thing? In the example, I've outlined how Calloway's book, his main argument, supports my thesis, and I've highlighted specific chapters I will use in my sub-arguments. So a complete annotation, then, is more than just a summary of the book. If you follow these 4 steps, you've gone through what the author said and how they supported it. You've shown who the author is, why they can even make claims on the topic. You've shown how your source fits within the rest of the literature. And you've shown why you want to use each source in your paper. More than just helping you get this particular assignment done, you can use this process for other essays you have as well. It helps you to create short summaries of the book sources you're looking at, helps you to refine quickly what you're looking for when you're looking for ideas again later. It also helps to place your own writing in a wider context of what other people are saying. So if you have any questions about this or anything else, feel free to email or come by. I've also listed some other sessions at the library that might be helpful as you're working on your paper. So if there's anything else about annotated bibliographies, feel free to ask me now. Thank you very much for coming out today. Thanks.